Welcome to the Penn State Wrestling Show. I'm Thomas Francard, Greg Pickle with me. Another ho-hum Big Ten Championship for the Penn State Nittany Lions. They take the regular season crown. They take the postseason crown. Now they're on to the big one, the national championship crown for 2024-25 coming up later this month. Greg, where do you want to start with Penn State at the Big Ten? Because there's a big weekend, and I know that there's some intrigue and there's some drama coming out of it. But what's your big picture takeaway from the latest postseason championship for the Big Tens for Penn State wrestling?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, T. Frank. Another Big Ten title for Penn State. That's 3 in a row now under the direction of Cale Sanderson. And this one went a lot like a lot of the other ones did, where Penn State had 9 semifinalists, 6 finalists, multiple champions, and ended up in a position where not everyone wrestled their best. But as we talk about on this show a lot, the goal is not to wrestle your best at the Big Ten tournament. It's to be ready to go for the national tournament. Now, whether or not one Nittany Lion will be ready to go at all is something we're going to discuss here in a little bit. But Penn State set a new school record with 181.5 points, beating last year's school record that was set at the tournament a year ago in Maryland by 11 points. And took care of business. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of Penn State fans who, it was funny sitting there Saturday night as things did not start well for Penn State in the semifinal round. And some of our members over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and fans on social media were having a bit of a freak out as if the outcome of the tournament was in doubt, or that Penn State would not rally in the second half of the semifinal session as it always does. So, it was a good weekend for Penn State. Not a perfect one, but, you know, again, like we've talked about endlessly, their goal is to be perfect at nationals, which starts, a week and 2 days from now, depending on when you're listening to this on March 11th as we tape it. But all told, it was a productive weekend, and most importantly, all 10 Nittany Lions are qualified for the NCAA tournament.
So when we take a look at some of the wins and losses, Shane Van Ness, Bo Bartlett, did any of that surprise you? Was any of that something that you take anything major away from early on for Penn State?
Yeah, certainly. I think that when you look at those two guys, Bo Bartlett, the senior who starts at Penn State for 141 pounds, entered the tournament as the number 1 seed, ended up finishing 3rd, beat Jesse Mendez again, which is a match that we talked about earlier this year during the dual meet season. He beat him then, and of course he lost to him during the NWCA All-Star Classic and in last year's NCAA Final. But no, I mean, look, Vance Valmbar, I was telling people over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com before the semifinals, the Minnesota wrestler who beat Bo Bartlett in the semifinals, he's a darn good wrestler. And I know that he got beat pretty handily in the finals, but it didn't necessarily shock me that Bo Bartlett lost that match. Would I have predicted that he was going to win it going into it? Yes, but I would have also told you that Von Bauer was going to wrestle him tight, and an outcome that was not favorable for Penn State would not have been a shock. So it really wasn't. It was a decision loss. Bo comes back through the consolation bracket, finishes 3rd. One note as we tape this again on March 11th that the NCAA seeds come out Wednesday night. We'll have reaction to that over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I think Bo Bartlett still has a chance to be the 1 seed at nationals despite finishing 3rd at NCAAs. It'll be interesting to see how the computer and the coach ranks and everything spit out the brackets at 141. I think we'll talk about it more soon, that he has a chance to still be the 1 seed despite finishing 3rd at Big Ten. And then when we move on to 149 pounds, Shane Van Ness started his tournament with a bye, won by major decision in round 2, and then got upset by Cannon Webster of Illinois 4-2 in the semis, and then rolls to 2 major decisions, including one over Kyle Parko of Iowa, to finish 3rd at Big Tens as well. So, again, I think that was the more surprising of the two for sure. Webster's a good wrestler. I did not see him beating Shane Van Ness. He never got his offense going, and as we've talked about before, when these guys don't get their offense going, especially seemingly in the lower weights for whatever reason, it tends not to end well. You get into a lot of tight matches, and this one wasn't particularly tight, but he got thrown early and was not able to recover, and he'll be better for it. So not the end of the world. I guess we should cover Braden Davis quick as well while we're in the conversation about guys who lost. Okay, so we're working in reverse order here, but down to 133. Davis beat Andrew Hampton 11-2 to start his tournament, and then lost in the quarters to Dylan Shawver of Rutgers 3-1. No great surprise there. He beat him during the dual meet season 2-1 on the strength of riding time. So everyone knew that match was going to be close. It was close again, and it went in favor of the Scarlet Knight. So not a shock there. I thought Davis looked as good as he had in the consolation second round and then the consolation semifinal. Coming back through on the backside, I thought he looked as good as he maybe did all season, and certainly in weeks with him dealing with that injury. Beat Braxton Brown in Maryland 9-7 in the semifinals, got a lead and held on to it late, and then got decked by Nick Bouzakis of Ohio State in the final. So kind of a very Braden Davis tournament where there were times where he looked like the guy and someone who we saw wrestle well, at a high level and an aggressive level in other instances. And then at the end, he looked like kind of the guy that tends to find himself in bad situations, some of which he puts himself in, some might argue most of which he puts himself in, and got pinned. So I don't know. Those three guys, we'll have a story Wednesday at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com attempting to predict the seeds for the NCAA tournament. I feel pretty good Bartlett is going to be one of the top 3 seeds and probably on the top line. Maybe not, but I think he'll be a top 3 seed. Van Ness is sort of a toss-up to me, and then Braden Davis could end up just about anywhere. I have no idea how the matches he missed during the Big Ten portion of the schedule will impact him in the computer rankings. I don't know what the coaches will make of his Big Ten tournament, so very fascinated to see how that plays out. By far, I would say Davis and Van Ness are the 2 Nittany Lions, along with Josh Barr for a different reason, that will face the most interesting seeding process at Big Tens.
So let's get to Josh Barr. We're going to start with all of the negatives, maybe, because we want, like, saving for dessert. We're going to get to the champions here in a second. But Josh Barr suffering an injury. Yeah. How does that play into another national championship quest for Penn State wrestling in the NCAA tournament? And what do you know at this point?
Yeah, so Josh Barr walked off was helped off the mat with assistance, not putting much any weight really, on his left leg at the end of a consolation semifinal match with Isaiah Salazar of Minnesota that Barr was unfortunately had the medical default out of about a minute 30 into it, a little bit more than that, but we're talking seconds after that. He got taken, he was in a scramble early and seemed to do something wrong and then got taken down, tried to compete, and it just became very clear very quickly that was not going to happen. So 2 things here. The first one is after what we saw Dan Monthly, the legendary Penn State wrestling trainer, do for Carter Starachi last year, I am not ruling anything out. But I keep seeing that comparison being drawn, and it's just so important to remember that Starachi got hurt in the final dual meet of the year. So keep in mind, there was that week between the dual meet and Big Tens, and then the week between NCAAs and the Big Tens for Carter Starachi to get to a point where he was able to wrestle and ultimately win a national title. Josh Barr does not have the benefit of that extra week. He has the rest of this week and then the start of next to get ready. So I saw some reports out there. Justin Bosch of the Boschmania podcast said that he feels, I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but suggested on his show that Barr should be good for nationals. We'll see. I wouldn't doubt that. At the same time, I do think there's no question that the way his season ended there, unfortunately, with or not his season, but his Big Ten session rather, ended there with the injury will impact where he is in the seeds. And I don't really even have a great guess there. I would, if you made me guess, I would guess somewhere between 5 and 9 for his seed at nationals at 197 pounds, but it's just hard to say. And so, there's a group of Penn State guys we're going to get to here in a second, T. Frank, that we feel are pretty good about where they'll be at nationals based on what they've done so far. But there's a group ending here with Barr and 3 guys we talked about first that it's a bit up in the air. So we'll have to wait and see. But obviously for Penn State, it's hoping Josh Barr is not just ready to go, but ready to go at a level that we've seen from him so far during a very impressive redshirt freshman season.
Yeah, for sure. We'll kind of play that out and preview that once we get closer to the NCAA tournament. Of course, Cale Sanderson is speaking next week. I doubt we'll get any sort of information on an injury update at that point, but we'll have it for you here at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Okay, so clean the board, right? Ate your vegetables, talked about the interesting intrigue, some of the guys that did not finish in the as champions. Let's get to Luke Lildahl, a wrestler who, as a freshman, I don't even want to say had some ups and downs, but just was a freshman going through a Big Ten schedule, which is a rough Big Ten schedule, but at the right time comes out as a champion. So what did you see from Lildahl in the Big Ten tournament, and how do you think that projects him, propels him? Does that potentially propel him to what I think everyone hopes he could do, which is be an All-American as a freshman?
Yeah, well, first I got to own up to it. I did it on the board, but I also do it here. Hopefully, you're a listener. Mac Fleetwood PSU on the board. Him and I had a disagreement that Lillidahl would be favored over Matt Ramos going into the Big Ten tournament, and Luke Lillidahl just destroyed him. The former number one ranked wrestler in the country at 125 pounds. He's not going to be ranked there coming out of this tournament. In fact, Luke Lillidahl is likely to ascend to that top spot in the country, and so he had the. I'm sure he would tell you, these Penn State guys will always tell you that there is no perfect tournament, but as close to it as you could get for a freshman going into his first postseason, and it ended up with a title. He beat Caleb Smith of Nebraska 4-3 in the finals. The question now for him, is he following the same path Braden Davis did in terms of going from Big Ten champion to number one seed at 125 pounds at the NCAA tournament? I would call that more likely than not. There's some guys that have a case for that top spot. And again, without knowing the computer formula they use to spit these things out beyond the coach rank, it's just really hard to feel totally confident about all of any weights where there's questions. Like, there's no question about 184, right? Carter Starachi's number one.
Yep.
But for a weight like this where there are some cases to be made for other guys, it'll be interesting to see. But I would be willing to bet more likely than not, he ends up on the number one line Wednesday night. Time will tell. But it was an impressive tournament, and he's a guy that, again, the time he got pinned this year, he had trouble getting off of, getting out from underneath his opponent and ended up getting pinned. He looked better underneath in this tournament. It goes without saying that the more times he's able to not end up underneath his opponent, the better off he's going to be. That goes for just about any wrestler, but seemingly him at this stage of his career for sure. So, hopes will be high for Penn State for Luke Lillidahl at Nationals. They were high coming into this season in terms of the expectations of what he could do for a program that has had a bit of a drought of success at 125. And so far, T. Frank, he's checked just about every box you could have hoped for getting to this point of the season.
So from there, it's chalk, I would imagine. Kasak, Haynes, Messenbrink, Starachi, all champions. That was the expectation. So the core of Penn State's run that they go on in these tournaments or in any dual meet delivered. What is from that group? What do you think is interesting? What stood out to you in the way they wrestled or how things played out?
Yeah, Tyler Kasak can't stop getting poked in the eye, man. I don't know if opponents are just targeting that or what, but he can't catch a break.
Leading with the face.
Yeah, he joked about that a little bit on Big Ten Network. But no, his pin of Antrell Taylor of Nebraska in the semifinals in a minute 17 in the first period was super impressive. He will be the number one seed at the NCAA tournament at 157. Continues his great season. Obviously, he's almost certainly going to have to wrestle with that cut on his forehead that he suffered during the dual meet portion of the season. So we'll see how that impacts things. Mitchell Messenbrink rolled to another title at 165 pounds. Got a lot. Mikey Caliendo of Iowa gave him a match in the finals. Messenbrink was not really in danger of losing that, in my opinion, 4-1 decision to final. But Mikey Caliendo gave him a match, and Mitchell Messenbrink appreciated that. Not a lot of guys will. A lot of guys will just sit back and not let him get his offense going. And I thought Caliendo wrestled a pretty fair match and a good match. And you heard Mitchell Messenbrink talk about that afterwards. So impressed by him. Still goes in the Nationals as the number one seed and the top dog at 165. 174, you mentioned Levi Haynes. Very nice tournament for him. Gets a fall in the second round, which was the quarters at this tournament, and then gets a decision over Patrick Kennedy. And he majors Lenny Pinto to punch his tickets to Nationals, where for quite some time, T. Frank, the hope of wrestling observers has been a rematch between him and Keegan O'Toole of Missouri, who beat him at the collegiate wrestling duels back in December. O'Toole on the, not just that win, but his record overall will go into this tournament at number one. Levi Haynes will be number two, so they'll be on opposite sides of the bracket. And I think most, certainly me, am hoping to see that match in Philadelphia again in 2 weeks in the finals, because it will be extraordinarily high-level college wrestling, which is obviously what we all go to the national tournament to watch for. So we'll be impressed by that. And then Carter Starachi, man, I'll tell you what, Max McElney, I think I got that wrong, but hopefully McElney, I'm trying to remember how they pronounced it on the broadcast. At any rate, we'll get that fixed up for the national tournament preview show next week. But Minnesota freshman who went into this match with nothing to lose and only lost by decision 8-5 in sudden victory. There's not many wrestlers that take Carter Starachi to extra time, and certainly there's not many freshmen who have been able to accomplish that feat. But he wrestled a strong match. He took Carter Starachi down early. Starachi had to work to come back to tie the match match, which is, again, something he is not accustomed to doing. But he was able to do it, and it was good news, obviously, for Penn State that he leaves the Big Ten as another, a champion yet again, and he goes into the NCAAs as the top seed, which leaves us just one weight to cover, T. Frank.
Yeah, and that would be heavyweight. And so it was what we highlighted coming into the Big Ten Championship, Gable Stevenson and Greg Kirkfleet. What did you take from Kirkfleet's finish as the number 2 seed in the tournament?
Yeah, so I mean, you look at his tour. It's just kind of the way the season has been shaping up, right? He came into the year, Penn State's Greg Kirkfleet did, as the number 1 seed. Gable Stevenson decided to come back for a final collegiate year after multiple years off. Obviously, one part of that going to the Olympics, another part of that going into the WWE. But he had eligibility left, decided to use it, rolled his way to the finals as expected, and then beat Greg Kirkfleet in the Big Ten finals by decision 10-3. So. Look, it doesn't really matter the outcome of this match. Assuming Gable's 1, there's no assumption needing to be made there. Assuming Kirkfleet's 2, which would be, I think, a shock to many people if he's not. I guess Wyatt Hendrickson of Oklahoma State, the only guy who could potentially pass him there. I don't see that happening, though. Assuming Kirkfleet can get to the finals in Philadelphia, it will be about what the plan of attack is against Gable in that match. That's what this whole season has been building up to. We can't sit here and tell you week after week that Penn State looks to get to its peak at nationals and then ignore the fact that maybe this weight more than any other, with I guess maybe the exception of 74 with Keegan O'Toole and Levi Haynes, but they wrestled in December, of course. This collision course has been set since Gable announced he was coming back sometime in the fall. And so the plan was not to beat him at Big Tens. Penn State would have taken it had that been the case, but the plan was not to beat him at Big Tens. It was to put the best plan together to beat him at nationals. Kenny, I mean, based on what I saw at Big Tens, he's going to have a little bit more offense going. There's no question about that. I don't ever rule out a Penn State wrestler, especially on a national stage, but Gable Stevenson is one of the best that's ever done at the college level, and Greg Kirkfleet is going to have to find another level if he wants to beat him in Philadelphia in 2 weeks.
So the last thing here, obviously there is the accolades part of this. Starachi named the Big Ten Wrestler of the Year. Of course, Cale Sanderson, Big Ten Coach of the Year, which they're going to have to name after him pretty soon. But not only that, we started with some of the, these didn't go Penn State's way on some of the, the midweights and the lighter weights, but they score 181 and a half team points, breaking last year's record of 170. So how dominant is this team, and how dominant do you expect them to be previewing the NCAA championship?
Yeah, it's ridiculously dominant, and it will go to NCAAs with hopes of breaking last year's team points record, winning another national title. Again, until we get a better feel for how Josh Barr is doing, it's really difficult to sit here 8-9 days, whatever it is, before the NCAA tournament and give you a strong opinion about whether or not Penn State will break that points record. I mean, I think the safe bet would be to say that it will. Just based on its history. But if you only have 9 wrestlers instead of 10, that obviously reduces your scoring possibilities, which would greatly reduce your chances of breaking it. But yeah, no doubt Penn State either way goes into this tournament as the favorite, as the expected champs. And it'll be interesting to see how many end up with, top seeds and top 5 seeds, things like that. How many of them become champs, and then how many of them, can go on and score bonus points that kind of takes to win a team race. So it should be good. We'll preview it next week right here for sure.
Yep, and of course, like we said, we'll have Cale Sanderson coming up next week as well. So subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Follow Greg Pickle over on the website so that you can have those conversations and you can tell him you're right and he's wrong when you have a conversation about Luke Lildahl on the message board. Because there's one thing about Greg is I always appreciate a man who's going to say when he's like, no, I had that wrong. And Greg's that kind of guy. If you haven't gotten that from weeks and weeks and weeks of this show. So, Greg, as always, appreciate you. Appreciate you coming on the show. We'll be back next week with more of the Penn State Wrestling Show.